Have you ever seen a police dog refuse every command and dig like something was screaming beneath the earth? What if that disobedience wasn't a failure, but the only reason a missing boy was ever found? In a forest drenched in fog, a police dog broke all protocol, circling, howling, tearing at the dirt, until her handler finally followed. What they uncovered silenced an entire investigation team. If stories of instinct, silent courage, and four-legged truth-tellers move something in your soul, we'd be honored if you subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and if you've ever trusted an animal's instinct more than your own. Because today's story isn't just about what was buried, it's about who refused to walk away. The early fog clung low over Blackridge Hollow, turning the pines into a forest of shadows. Officer Celera Dorn adjusted the strap of Shadow's vest, her hand lingering for a moment on the shepherd's broad back. The dog stood still, but not calm. Her body buzzed with tension, muscles taut, ears forward. Something was off. "Perfect weather for a scent grid," said Zephyr Vexen, clipboard in hand. "Cool, damp, no wind drift. Let's make it clean." His voice was firm, routine, but Solara's silence lingered. Shadow hadn't blinked once since they arrived. Solara gave the release signal. The German shepherd shot forward, nose low, sweeping like a pendulum, until she didn't. Mid-stride, Shadow froze, then turned, and sprinted, not toward the assigned quadrant, but away from it, cutting through brambles like they weren't there. "Shadow!" Solara called, her voice sharp with command. No response. The others turned. Some chuckled. One muttered, "Guess someone forgot who's in charge." But Solara's stomach had already dropped. This wasn't misbehavior. This was insistence. She chased after her partner, brush slapping her legs, heart thundering, until the forest opened into a narrow glade. And there, Shadow was circling, digging, frantic. "Officer Dorn!" Zephyr's voice barked over the radio. "Control your animal. Get her back on track." But Solara didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched. As the ground cracked beneath protocol, and something far older rose up from the soil beneath them. Shadow wasn't lost. She had found something. Something that refused to stay buried. The digging didn't stop. Shadow's paws struck the soil with desperate rhythm, flinging leaves, clawing past roots. Not wild, not erratic. Focused, controlled, determined. Solera Dorn dropped to one knee, her breath catching in her throat. She'd never seen her partner like this. Not in training, not in the field, not once. And then, enough! Zephyr Vexen emerged from the tree line, boots crushing the underbrush, frustration tightening his jaw. "This is a controlled exercise, Dorn. Control your dog." Solera opened her mouth, but nothing came out. How could she explain a feeling that wasn't logic, that knew without proof? "She's not off task," she finally managed. "She's alerting." Zephyr's eyes narrowed. "There's no scent aid in this sector. You know that. Get her back or get off the field." The air around them felt thicker. Then came the sound, a low, high-pitched whine from Shadow. Not panic, not pain, a plea. Solera's heart squeezed. Her hand tightened on the leash. She didn't speak into her radio. She turned to the nearest trainee. "Shovel, now!" A pause, then movement. As the trainee sprinted back toward the gear truck, Zephyr stepped closer, his voice low. "If this is a mistake, it's your badge, Dorn." She didn't look at him. She looked at Shadow, covered in dirt, panting hard, but never looking away from the ground. "I don't think it is, because sometimes the deepest truths are found in the places you're told not to go." And Shadow was already digging toward one. The shovel hit something, soft but resistant. Solera paused. Her gloved fingers brushed the surface. Not soil, not stone. Root, number. She leaned closer. Clean cut, no bark, too pale. "Step back," she whispered. Zephyr moved beside her, the edge in his voice gone, replaced with something colder, quieter. "That's not part of the training aid." They both crouched now. No cameras, no instructions, just instinct. Shadow sat motionless nearby, breath steady but shallow, her eyes locked on the growing hollow. With careful hands, Solara scraped away more dirt, each layer lighter, looser, like someone had disturbed this spot recently, then covered it up in a hurry. Then, a shape, curved, smooth, human, not plastic, not synthetic, a knuckle, her throat closed. Zephyr exhaled through his teeth, backing off with a hand over his mouth. "This isn't possible," he muttered. But it was. A real body, buried just inches below a mock training ground. Solara's mind spun. Had Shadow smelled this all morning? Is that why she was pacing earlier, pushing against something I couldn't see? She didn't have time to unravel the guilt forming in her chest. Not yet. Instead, she turned to the trainee who had brought the shovel. "Get the perimeter marked. No one steps into this clearing unless I say." Shadow stood now, tense but calmer, as if she'd waited just long enough for them to listen. Solara met her eyes. "I hear you now." And this time, she wasn't going to ignore it. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was held breath, the kind that lives between realization and confirmation. Zephyr stood frozen behind the perimeter tape, radio limp in his hand. The clipboard, the authority, the sarcasm, gone. What replaced it wasn't fear, it was recognition. He'd seen this before. Just not here. Not today. Solara crouched lower, clearing the rest of the shallow earth with forensic precision. No shovels now, only gloved hands and reverence. Shadow sat beside her like a statue unblinking. 12 inches down, the shape solidified. Ribs, shoulder, the side of a young face. And something blue. Fabric, a torn strap, a backpack. Solara leaned closer. Her fingers pinched the stained cloth, lifting it slightly from the soil. Letters still visible in worn thread. WHSXC. She didn't need a name yet. She already knew. Zephyr finally spoke. "Radio it in. This isn't a drill." His voice cracked, then steadied like a man locking grief in a vault. Solara nodded, her words catching on the first try. "This is Officer Dorn, Blackridge Training Zone. I need on-call homicide, forensics in the coroner. We've recovered human remains." The wind shifted, and suddenly, everything felt colder. Shadow leaned gently against Solara's knee, anchoring her in the moment. She whispered so only the dog could hear. "You brought him home." And just like that, a training field became a crime scene, a forgotten clearing, now sacred ground. By the time the forensic tent went up, Blackridge Hollow had transformed. What once held the rustle of leaves and whispered instruction now pulsed with boots, low radios, and breathless disbelief. The forest didn't make a sound, but everyone heard something shift. Solara, too, stood just outside the yellow tape, her gloves streaked with earth, eyes locked on Shadow. The dog hadn't moved far, still near the grave, still guarding. Not with teeth, not with growls. With presence. Zephyr, 1, returned from the ridge, his radio still pressed to his shoulder. "Detective Stroud is inbound. 10 minutes. Solara nodded, then said nothing. Not at first. She was watching the ground again. Not the grave, but where Shadow's body had stiffened before the first dig. Her nose had flared. Her spine had straightened. She knew, and Solara had almost missed it. Almost silenced it. She knelt beside the dog, brushing pine needles from her coat. "Back there. When I called you off." Her voice caught. "I didn't listen." Shadow turned, eyes locking onto hers. No blame. Just the quiet, steady weight of trust. Then her body shifted, nose flaring again, and she stood, not toward the grave, away from it, north. Solara blinked. "Another?" Shadow didn't look back. She just started walking, and Solara followed, not with hesitation, not with question, with conviction, because now something had cracked open inside her too. Not just a case, a belief. That this dog didn't just track scent. She felt echoes the rest of them had long stopped hearing. Shadow didn't hesitate. Each step through the pine-carpeted trail was measured, but urgent. like she was being pulled by something deeper than scent, like she remembered it. Solara, too, followed close behind, no longer asking where or why. Her radio crackled faintly, but she didn't respond. Not yet, not until she knew. They moved down slope, away from the main grid, toward a patch of earth untouched by boot or flag. Then Shadow stopped, not at a tree, not near a path, a fallen log, half-rotted, moss-covered, insignificant, until the dog lowered her nose and sat, still, focused. Solara's heart rate kicked, quick, clipped beats. She circled the log, crouched beside it, and saw it, a cigarette butt, wedged deep between bark and soil, preserved from rain by chance and decay. But why here, so far from the grave? Then came the twist. Shadow didn't stop. She moved again, this time at a sharper angle, 6 paces, then 8. Stopped. Saturday again. Solara brushed away leaves and found it. A blood-stained handkerchief half buried, edges curled with age. The silence broke. A voice from the trees, gravel, precise. "Looks like your dog's building a map." Detective Kalian Stroud, 3, stepped into the clearing, forensic team trailing behind him. He glanced at the objects, then at Solara. These weren't dropped randomly. They were left. Solara looked at Shadow, who stood now with tail low, eyes scanning the trees. Not just tracking, reconstructing. She wasn't just leading them to evidence. She was telling them a story, and they were finally listening. Shadow's path led them deeper into the hollow, where trees thinned and the ground bore strange scars. A ring of rocks, blackened center, ashes that never truly cooled. Solara, too, knelt beside it. Her gloved fingers sifted through the debris until they struck something hard, metal, twisted, burnt. A crushed soda can, partially melted into the stone. Nearby, Shadow sat again, beside discarded wrappers, beer bottles dulled by weeks of rain, and boot prints. Faint but present, not recent, but not forgotten. This wasn't a body dump, Kalian Stroud, 3, murmured, scanning the site. This was a base. Solara's voice was tight, and they left in a hurry. She pointed at the tents, still rolled tight in their packaging, unused, untouched. Only the fire had burned, long, intense, like they were trying to erase something. Stroud moved with growing urgency now, mapping the layout. If the boy died here, Solara didn't answer, because Shadow had already moved again, slow, deliberate, toward the edge of the clearing. Her nose grazed a shallow groove in the soil. Tire tracks. Stroud joined her. Someone drove in. Not hiked. Solara's breath caught. This entire scene, its misdirection. And then Shadow stopped one more time, beside a low stack of rocks, her body stiff. Solara lifted the top stone. Plastic bag, inside. A phone, intact. Battery drained, but dry. Stroud didn't speak. He didn't have to, because the story was writing itself now, piece by piece, beneath the silence these boys thought would protect them. They almost erased him. But Shadow. She traced the fire back to its first spark. Back at the mobile command center, the recovered phone blinked to life under forensic gloves. Battery replaced. Data cloned. No password needed. Stroud, 3, stood over the tech's shoulder as the first image loaded. A forest clearing. That same fire pit. 4 boys, beer in hand, laughing, alive. And one of them was Finn Arlo 4. Solara, too, felt the bottom drop out of her breath. This was supposed to be the day he went hiking alone, she said softly, eyes scanning the timestamp. Stroud nodded. According to the statement, he never made it. But there he was, front and center in their lie. Smiling, unaware. Before, swipe. More images, more moments. Finn roasting marshmallows. Finn holding a water bottle. Finn with his arm slung around the boy later identified as Thorn Ashval. 6. None of them looked like they planned to kill anyone. Then came the final photo. Grainy, slightly tilted. Finn standing apart from the group, alone by the trees. His expression distant, distracted. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, a lifted red Jeep, Stroud leaned in. That's not just any vehicle. Solera's voice dropped. That's the one from the Rangers report. The one they said was never there. And just like that, the narrative fractured. It hadn't been a disappearance. It had been a burial of truth, dressed up in friendship, then abandoned like litter. But the photos never lied, and neither did Shadow. The silence inside the interrogation room was different from the forest. There were no trees here, no fog, just white walls, a steel table, and the subtle buzz of overhead lights. Arendor Vale, 8, sat across from Stroud, 3, his shoulders curled, a lawyer beside him, unreadable. The boy looked younger than his 17 years, fragile in posture, but not in silence. Stroud placed the photo on the table, the campfire, the beers. Finn Arlo, 4, alive, surrounded by his friends. You told us he went alone, that the trip was canceled. Arendor stared at the image, then blinked. My client has nothing to say at this time, the attorney interjected, but it was already too late, because emotion cracked faster than strategy. It was an accident, Arendor murmured, voice hollow. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Solara, 2, watched through the one-way mirror, heart clenched. So it was true. The story Finn's body had been trying to tell. Shadow had heard it first. Stroud leaned in, calm and cold. Walk me through it. The confession unfolded in pieces. An argument, a shove. Finn's head striking stone. Blood, panic, and a decision no teenager should ever have to make. Burying a friend to save their futures. They said no one would believe us if we told the truth, Arendor whispered. They said he was already gone. Solera closed her eyes. He wasn't gone. He was abandoned. And if not for Shadow, he never would have been found. The confession had weight, but it wasn't enough. Not for closure, not for truth. Because what mattered most wasn't just how Finn died. It was where, and what they tried to erase. The forensic team returned to Blackridge Hollow that morning, following Arendor's statement with surgical precision. Coordinates, distances, angle of the fire ring. Solara, 2, and Shadow led the way. The ground hadn't changed, but the air had. It knew they were listening now. Shadow moved slower this time, not with urgency but purpose, as if walking memory itself. She stopped near the ring of stones, then sat, not at a new site, at the same one. Solera knelt beside her, gloved hands brushing soil, and there, beneath the shallow roots, they found it. Blood, dried, soaked into the earth, discolored bark, but unmistakable. Finn hadn't just fallen there, he died there. Blunt force trauma, murmured the pathologist, kneeling with delicate tweezers. Stone contact, back of the skull, consistent with impact. Stroud, 3, stared, jaw tight. They buried him 20 yards away, just far enough to make the story work. Solera didn't reply. She was watching Shadow, who now lay quietly beside the rock ring, her breathing slow. Peaceful, as if she too had needed this final piece. Not for praise, not for credit, for the boy who was never meant to be found. The call came quietly, almost like an afterthought. An old park ranger, responding late to the chatter on the scanner. His voice was steady, but something in the way he paused between words made Stroud, 3, lean forward. I think I saw them. His name was Varen Blackmore, 5, 30 years with the Forest Service. He didn't chase ghosts, but he remembered faces. They weren't supposed to be there, he said, recounting the June morning. 4 boys, red Jeep, fire already lit when I got to them. But the gear, untouched, like they had packed to stay but changed their mind mid-decision. Solara, 2, listened in silence. What stood out? Stroud asked. Blackmore hesitated. They were jumpy, all of them. But one, tall, blonde, heavy build, he was shaking, not angry, gutted. I remember thinking, that boy just lost something he didn't mean to. Did you get names? No, Varen replied, but I remember the Jeep's plate. Had a wildlife conservation tag. That narrowed it fast. Stroud clicked his pen, fingers already reaching for the DMV records. The Jeep was registered to Thorn Ashvales, 6, Father. Solara turned toward Shadow, who was now resting by the fire ring, her ears alert despite her calm. The circle was closing, not just in the forest, but in memory. The old ranger's recollection, dismissed, forgotten, had become the final stitch in a narrative carefully torn apart by 3 terrified boys. They almost erased it. Almost. But justice remembers, even when it's whispered through pine trees and carried by dogs who never stop walking. 3 chairs, 3 boys, 3 different versions of almost the same lie. But now Arendor Vale, 8, had cracked, and Ravik Wynn, 7, wasn't far behind. He sat in interview room B, arms crossed, jaw clenched, defensive. But his eyes fractured. Stroud, 3, dropped a single printed photo on the table. The fire pit, the blood-soaked handkerchief, and beside it, the recovered phone. "Your buddy told us it was an accident," he said, voice calm, "that you tried to stop it." Silence, then. "Didn't look like you were stopping much," Stroud added, sliding another photo forward. This one stung. It showed Ravik's hand, raised in the air behind Finn. 4, mid-gesture, mid-motion, mid-lie. Ravik blinked hard, fist tightening. "He was leaving, all right." His voice cracked. "He was gonna tell." Tyler panicked. "So you hit him too?" Ravik didn't answer, but the silence said yes. Stroud leaned in. "You could have walked away." "I tried," Ravik snapped. "You don't know what it was like out there. How fast it turned." Stroud paused, let the words settle, then said the quiet truth. "He was your friend." The boy looked away. Tears finally. Through the mirror, Solara, too, watched in silence, hand resting gently on Shadow's back. The dog didn't move, didn't blink. She didn't need a confession. She had smelled it in the soil, long before they were ready to speak it. The last to speak was the one who had started it all. Thorn Ashvale, 6, the ringleader, the driver, the first to panic and the last to confess. He sat stone still in the interview room, no lawyer this time, just the weight of 3 statements, a mountain of evidence, and a boy-shaped ghost in the shape of Finn Arlo, 4. Stroud, 3, didn't push. He just slid a single object across the table. A collar tag, bent, dirt-caked, recovered from the burial site. It wasn't Finn's. It was Shadow's, lost in the dig, found beside him, the final symbol of presence, of truth refusing to stay buried. Thorne stared at it for a long time. Then, "I told him to shut up." Stroud leaned in slightly. "He said he'd tell his dad. Said this wasn't who we were. Said if we drove away, we'd live with it forever." His voice cracked, not out of fear, but something colder. Shame. He was right. The air in the room shifted, like something let go. Solara, too, watched from behind the mirror, her hand gripping Shadow's harness. And for the first time since that morning in the clearing, her eyes welled. Because justice didn't always roar in courtrooms. Sometimes it whispered in rooms like this, from boys who finally stopped lying, and dogs who never stopped believing their humans would one day listen. 3 days later, a soft autumn wind moved through Blackridge Hollow, stirring the leaves like breath over memory. The training ground had been shut down. The grave was now marked, and beside it, a simple plaque. Finn Arlo. The truth always finds its way. Solara, too, stood a few feet away, her uniform pressed, her heart still unraveling. Shadow sat at her side, ears pricked, posture alert, but not tense. Today they weren't searching, they were honoring. Across the field, Finn's parents stepped through the trees. No ceremony, no cameras. Just 2 people carrying something heavier than grief. Closure. Elizabeth Arlo knelt beside the plaque, her hand trembling as it brushed the earth. Then she turned to Shadow. "She didn't give up," she whispered. "She knew where he was, when no one else did." Solara's voice was soft. "She refused to stop." James Arlo, eyes wet but proud, reached into his coat and handed Solara something small. Worn, blue, a cross-country medal. Finn's last race. He won this 2 weeks before. James paused, swallowing the weight. He said it wasn't about speed. It was about not leaving anyone behind. Solara held it for a long second, then clipped it gently to Shadow's vest. And for just a breath, the forest felt still, not empty, because in the silence, there was peace. Not perfect, but enough. Enough to say goodbye. Later that evening, back at the precinct, the building was dim, quiet in a way only the end of a long case could make it. Solara, too, sat on the locker room bench, Shadow curled by her feet, tail twitching slightly in her sleep. The cross-country medal still clung to her vest, glinting faintly under the ceiling light. A gentle knock broke the silence. Captain Lysithea Morn stepped in, no clipboard this time, just something folded in her hand. "You've had quite the week," she said softly, eyes resting on Shadow. Solara nodded once, exhaustion threaded through every muscle. She wouldn't stop, not for anything. Lysithea smiled, then extended the paper. "That's why this came through faster than usual." Solara opened it and froze. Her breath caught. A commendation. Not for her. For Shadow. Operational bravery. Unofficial lead alert. Reclassified. Field-directed discovery. A line at the bottom stood out. Call sign recommendation. Echo 1. Her throat tightened. "Echo," she whispered. Lysithea stepped closer. She earned it. Outside, the hallway buzzed faintly again. Calls, radios, life resuming. But in that small space, time stilled. Shadow stirred, lifted her head, as if she knew. Solara reached down, rubbing the space behind her ears. She never needed to speak, she murmured. She just needed someone willing to listen. And in that moment, Echo became more than a name. It became a vow. 2 days later, they returned to Blackridge Hollow, not as investigators, but as something closer to witnesses. There were no cameras, no briefing, just a small group from the unit, and one dog. Echo, now officially named. Solara, too, stood beneath the tall pines, her gaze soft, distant. She watched the wind roll through the branches above and felt the weight of every step that had brought them here. "She doesn't know she's a hero," Zephyr Vexen, one said beside her, hands tucked in his jacket. "She doesn't need to," Solara replied. Then, Echo moved, not to the grave, not to the fire pit, but to a patch of earth that looked like nothing. Flat, undisturbed. She sat. Everyone paused. Solara's voice was calm but firm. "Mark it, now!" The forensic text moved, and beneath the soil, buried inches deep, a knife, wrapped in cloth, faint blood, a monogram carved into the handle. Initials, T. A Zephyr exhaled sharply. "The murder weapon!" But Solara's eyes weren't on the blade. They were on Echo. The shepherd had lowered her head, resting it on the forest floor. Quiet, still. She never asked for credit. She just followed the trail until it ended in truth. Solara crouched beside her partner and whispered what needed no ceremony. "You didn't just bring him home. You gave him back to the world." That night, long after the last report was filed and the knife logged into evidence, Solara too sat alone in the precinct's rooftop courtyard. Above her, stars blinked quietly, distant, indifferent. Beside her, Echo. No uniform, no leash. Just two souls sharing silence. Solara held a photo in her hand. Not a mugshot, not evidence. A picture Elizabeth Arlo had given her. Finn, mid-run, legs outstretched in motion, cross-country jersey flapping behind him like a flag of freedom. His expression wasn't pose. It was real, focused, fierce, alive. Solara looked at Echo. "You followed him, didn't you?" she whispered. "Not just his scent, his rhythm." Echo shifted slightly, ears flicking, head tilted. He was running, even when no one saw it, even when everyone else forgot. Her voice cracked. "I think you knew, from the moment your paws hit that soil." She paused, breathing in the cool air. This wasn't about proving a dog's value or solving a case. It was about a boy who didn't get to finish his last run, and a dog who finished it for him. Echo leaned closer, gently resting her head in Solara's lap. Slow, deliberate. Not a gesture of service, a gesture of kinship. Two beings who heard something others didn't. and never stopped chasing it until it was no longer alone. The following week, Solara too was back on duty. Different calls, new cases, but the forest still lingered in her bones. She moved through them like someone walking in two worlds, one foot in the present, one still brushing the soil of Blackridge Hollow. Echo walked beside her, not as a symbol, but as herself. And for the first time in weeks, Solara let her lead without direction. They weren't chasing anymore. They were carrying. That afternoon, a delivery arrived at the station, a simple padded envelope. No return address. Inside, a thumb drive and a note. He filmed everything. We thought we deleted it, but something inside me couldn't. E.V. Stroud, 3, loaded the video silently. What played didn't scream, it didn't accuse, it just showed. Finn, 4, hours before the fight, talking to the camera. Wind in his hair, hope in his voice. I think when you know someone's not okay, you don't wait. You say something. You stay, even if you're scared. Solara didn't blink, didn't breathe. This wasn't a final clue. It was a final echo. A boy leaving behind the kind of truth no courtroom transcript could hold, and a dog who had felt its weight even when no one else could name it. Sometimes, justice isn't about what you find. It's about what finds its way back to you. By month's end, Blackridge Hollow looked the same, but it wasn't. The earth had closed, yes, but what lay beneath it still whispered in the trees. That day, Solara too returned, not as an officer, not as a handler, as a person. Echo padded silently at her side. No vest, no command leash, just presence. The forest greeted them like it remembered, and maybe it did. They reached the memorial quietly. Leaves drifted past the plaque, kissed the soil that had once been broken. The wind carried no sound. Then, Echo stopped, but not at the grave. She walked 10 paces east and lay down in the middle of the clearing. No alert, no signal, just stillness. Solara didn't call her back. She walked over, knelt beside her, and followed Echo's gaze to the canopy above where light filtered through like fragments of something older than words. This was where he had stood, before the fire, before the silence. Maybe Echo couldn't smell him anymore, but she could feel him. So could Solara. She pulled from her jacket a single item, the old race number Finn, 4, had worn, pinned it gently to a branch with a clip. No word spoken, but the forest listened, because sometimes the most sacred places don't echo sound. They echo belonging, and Echo was exactly where she was meant to be. The last light bled into the horizon. Solara, too, and Echo stood at the edge of Blackridge Hollow one final time, not to say goodbye, but to carry it forward. Behind them, the case was closed, the lies exposed. But ahead, the world still held silence that needed breaking. Echo looked up, not expecting a command, not needing praise, just being, as she always had, present, steady, unshakably tuned to the things most people miss. Solara reached down, her fingers brushing the metal that still hung on Echo's vest, the cross-country one, the one that never crossed a finish line, until now, and then barely above a whisper. You didn't just bring justice, you gave his story a heartbeat. There was no applause, no broadcast, just wind and memory, and a kind of peace that only comes when everything hidden finally breathes. If this story moved you, even in a quiet, unexpected way, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us what you felt, or what you remembered, or who you thought about. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, gently hit that subscribe button. Not for the algorithm, but for the next name that needs to be spoken, the next truth waiting beneath the soil, and the next dog who refuses to look away. Life lessons from this story. Sometimes the ones who speak the least carry the loudest truths. This wasn't just a story about a case being solved or a dog doing her job. It was about persistence without words, about what happens when we trust instinct over protocol, empathy over ego. Echo didn't chase glory. She didn't bark to be heard. She dug through silence, denial, and grief until someone finally listened. In life, we often look for answers in headlines and noise, but real truth, it hides in quiet moments, in the way someone hesitates before speaking, in the weight of a goodbye that never got to be said, in the way a dog refuses to walk away from a patch of earth no one else sees. This story reminds us, justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks in, on four legs, tail low, heart open, and when it does, we don't just solve a mystery, we restore a name. We return a boy to his story. So here's the question we leave you with. Who are you still not listening to? Because maybe the echo isn't fading, maybe it's waiting.